Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So as you can see by the title, we are going to be talking about all things spooky, all things autumn, all things Halloween in this list today. I always find that it's really tricky to find books during the months of September and October that give me that real fall, autumnal, Halloween vibe. I feel like there's like a real shortage of it. I have some books picked out for this year's reads that I'm gonna hope fit that a little bit more. So compiling this list was actually a little tricky. I feel like when I think of Halloween, I think of movies like Hocus Pocus and Trick or Treat that feel very Halloween and autumn centric, but when I think of horror novels, I don't always know. So I tried to pick some novels that give me small town spooky, autumn woods, Halloween, harvest kind of themes with this. So they're not all perfect, but I do think that they are great reads to read during spooky season. Forgive me if I seem a little out of it today. I spent 8.5 hours getting my leg tattooed, and it is the longest I have ever sat for a tattoo, and I'm still a little woozy because of it. But I did get my baby, my fur baby Bartok. I got his portrait tattooed, and it's very thematic to the movie Anastasia that he is named after, and he was born on the day before Halloween, so I had to throw a little pumpkin in there. I'll throw a photo of it right up there in case you're curious. And this tattoo was done by Alexandra Fish. It's my first tattoo by her. She is incredible. If you're interested in kind of new school portraiture, Halloween tattoos, dog portraits, she is absolutely who you guys want to see. Definitely check her out. Anyways, I am going to just ramble on if I don't stop talking now. So let's dive into this list. These are my top reads to get us in the mood for autumn and spooky season. In this, I will also include short stories because I do actually have quite a lot of short stories that I think fit perfectly for spooky season. So first up, I want to talk about Hex by Thomas Oyld Hoivlet. This was one of my top reads of 2020. I really love this book. This is scary, this is creepy, this is very disturbing. But this is a great small town tale about a very evil witch. This is a very unique witch, and this is a very unique town. This is a very modern book. It really does incorporate a lot of technology with a lot of old folklore. I understand that this is definitely a very polarizing book. Some people love it, some people hate it. I love it. I do think the ending is a little wonky. I see why people have issues with it, but overall I think this is great. This is very creepy, very disturbing, and definitely gives you those spooky, eerie, isolated, small town vibes in the middle of nowhere that I think about when I think of Halloween and monsters haunting people during Halloween. Very Michael Myers-esque. But let me read the back real quick. Welcome to Black Spring, a seemingly picturesque Hudson Valley town, haunted by the Black Rock Witch, a 17th century woman whose eyes and mouth are sewn shut. Muzzled, she walks the streets and enters homes at will. She stands next to children's beds for nights on end. Her eyes may never be opened, or the consequences will be too terrible to bear. The elders of Black Spring prevent the curse from spreading with high-tech surveillance. Frustrated by the lockdown, the town's teenagers break their strict regulations, and in doing so send the town spiraling into depraved practices of the distant past. This terrifying novel heralds the arrival of an exciting new voice in horror and fantasy. And Thomas Oyld Hoivlet is a Dutch author. He's written a couple books before this, but this book got huge and was translated into English. And it was supposed to be in 2021, but it seems like it's going to be in 2022. He does have another book that has already been released over in the Netherlands called Echo, but the English version will be here very soon, and I'm very excited to read it. So this is Hex. If you want a good original witch story, check this one out. Okay, next up. Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Cesare. I have talked about this book a bunch on my channel because this was my favorite read of 2020. This book is marketed as YA. This book is not YA. There is so much blood and gore in this book that I cannot believe it got a YA title. I assume it's YA because it is a traditional slasher story, which means all of our main characters are teenagers. Very Friday the 13th, very Nightmare on Elm Street. And that comparison is why I have chosen it. It also involves a lot of people dressed up as clowns in a small town, which is terrifying. Really scary. My favorite novel of all time is It, so anything to do with spooky clowns, I am so about it. So let's just read this inside flap. When Quinn and her father moved to a tiny town with a weird clown for a mascot, they're looking for a fresh start. But ever since the town's only factory shut down, Kettle Springs has been cracked in half. Most of the town believes that the kids are to blame. After all, the juniors and seniors at Kettle Springs High are the ones who threw the party where Arthur Hill's daughter died. They're the ones who set the abandoned factory on fire and who spend all their time posting pranks on YouTube. They have no respect and no idea what it means to work hard. For the kids, it's the other way around. And now Kettle Springs is caught in a constant battle between old and new, tradition and progress. It's a fight that looks like it will destroy the town, until one homicidal clown with a pork pie hat and a red nose decides to end it for good. Because if your opponents all die, you win the debate by default. I love this book. I read this book in like a day. This is so good. It's very easy to read. It's very spooky. It's very fun. It just screams like classic B-movie slasher. It's very, very well written, and it just gives me all of the Halloween vibes. I feel like this could be a movie and you would watch it every single Halloween. Adam Cesare did announce that a sequel to this is coming out, so we are really getting the true slasher effect with this, where we are just going to capitalize and make sequels on it. And I think it actually is also being turned into a movie, and the tagline is "The kids are not all right," which I think is very, very funny. I love this book. This is a great slasher film to get you in the mood for spooky season, and again, set in a small, isolated town. It's going to be a big theme with these books. Okay, next up is an actual children's book, or YA book, I guess you could say. This is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is my second favorite thing that Neil Gaiman has ever written, the first obviously being Coraline. Love Coraline. The Graveyard Book is amazing. I highly, highly, highly recommend everybody pick it up. Even if you don't want to read a book geared and marketed towards a younger audience, I think this book is spooky, creepy, beautiful, fun, haunting, and the whole thing takes place in a graveyard, so Halloween, spooky, awesome. Let me read the back for you. In this ingenious and captivating reimagining of Rudyard Kipling's classic adventure, The Jungle Book, Neil Gaiman tells the unforgettable story of Nobody Owens, a living, breathing boy whose home is a graveyard. Raised by a guardian who belongs neither to the mortal world nor the realm of the dead. Ooh, do with that what you will. Among the mausoleums and headstones of his home, Bod experiences things most mortals can barely imagine. But real, flesh and blood danger waits just outside the cemetery walls. The man who murdered the infant Bod's family will not rest until he finds Nobody Owens and finishes the job he began many years ago. I adore this book. This book is really, really beautiful. It is primarily set in a cemetery. Ghosts, vampires, all the spooky funness that you could find are in this novel. This is an amazing, quick, easy read, and it should be a Halloween classic for everybody. Alright, next up is Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. I read this book for the first time last year, though those came out quite a while ago. This book, I will tell you, I read it, and afterwards I was kind of like, what the fuck did I just read? I don't necessarily think this is the greatest Halloween story ever, but it is very moody and atmospheric. It is set on Halloween night. Jack-o'-lanterns are very, very, very pivotal to this plot, so I do think it is worth checking out, though I won't go out and say that this is a must read. I do think it's worth mentioning on this list, though, because it does kind of tick off all of the things that I would want in a Halloween story, though I'm not quite sure if I love it. But it is very, very nice, very atmospheric, and I will say I would rather read this over Ray Bradbury's The Halloween Tree, because I really don't like that book. That is another very Halloween-centric story, but I find that to be very weird with some questionable undertones. So we're going to talk about this one instead. So it says, Halloween 1963. They call him the October Boy, or All Hacksaw Face, or Sawtooth Jack. Whatever the name, everybody in the small Midwestern town knows who he is and how he rises from the cornfields every Halloween. A bloody butcher knife in his hand, and makes his way toward town, where gangs of teenage boys eagerly await their chance to confront the legendary nightmare, both the hunter and the hunted. The October Boy is the prize in an annual rite of life and death. Pete McCormick knows that killing the October Boy is his one chance to escape a dead-end future in this one-horse town. He's willing to risk everything, including his life, to be a winner for once. Before Halloween is over, people look into the sawtooth face of horror and discover the terrifying true secret of the October Boy. Very, very, very original concept. Very weird concept. This is, again, it's not a book for everybody, but if you want a short, quick read that's going to be super, super Halloween themed, this is probably a book to check out. Don't want to discourage anybody from reading this book because it is very unique. It didn't quite blow me away, but I see why a lot of people love it. Okay, next up, The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. I love this story. This is an amazing, amazing modern Gothic story. So it was like written in the 80s, but it feels like it could have been written in the 1800s. Super ghost story. If there's a play, there's a movie with Daniel Radcliffe, there's a sequel. I love this book. Again, it's a super short, easy read. It's like 100 pages. It even has illustrations. I love this book. Very just beautiful, classic, creepy, haunted ghost story. So let's read through it. What real reader does not yearn, somewhere in the recesses of his or her heart, for a really literate first-class thriller? One that chills the body but warms the soul with plot, perception, and language at once astute and vivid. In other words, a ghost story written by Jane Austen. Alas, we cannot give you Austen, but Susan Hill's remarkable Woman in Black comes as close to our era can provide. Set on the obligatory English moor and on an isolated causeway, the story has as its hero Arthur Kipps, an up-and-coming young solicitor who has come north from London to attend the funeral and settle the affairs of Miss Alice Drablow of Eel Marsh House. The routine formalities, he anticipates, give way to a tumble of events and secrets more sinister and terrifying than any nightmare. The rocking chair in the deserted nursery, the eerie sound of a pony and trap, a child's scream in the fog, and most dreadfully, and for Kipps most tragically, The Woman in Black. Woman in Black is both a brilliant exercise in atmosphere and controlled horror, and is a delicious spine-tingler. Proof positive that this neglected genre, the ghost story, isn't dead after all. Now, I don't actually remember if this book is set in autumn, but I will say the actual vibe from this book gives me autumn. It's all very misty and rainy and cold without feeling like winter and snow. So it is very dark. A lot of it is set at night, but I do absolutely adore this book. I think I read this book in a day. I mean, it's 100 pages. It's really easy. But I also love the play. I do love the film. I'm in a book club called The Women in Black after this book. So I definitely highly recommend if you've never read this, and if you like Gothic stories, read this. And if you don't like Gothic stories, this is just a great ghost story with a beautiful haunted manor in it. And it gives me all the Halloween vibes, and I love it so much. So the next book that I have, I don't actually have my physical copy with it because it's at my parents' house in DC, and I didn't really realize that. But I do really want to talk about it because it is one of my favorite Stephen King stories of all time, and that is Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot, for those of you who don't know, is Stephen King's reimagining of the story Dracula, set in a small town, obviously in Maine. It is also the sequel to Stephen King's short story, Jerusalem's Lot, which, if you guys have epics or have heard about this, Adrian Brody is currently starring and producing in a show called Chapelwaite, which is an actual adaptation of the story Jerusalem's Lot. Lots of vampires. It's really good. I highly recommend it. I think there are only like 4 episodes in right now, but it's awesome. Anywho, Salem's Lot. Let me read the backstory for you guys. So, thousands of miles away from the small township of Salem's Lot, 2 terrified people, a man and a boy, still share the secrets of those clapboard houses and tree-lined streets. They must return to Salem's Lot for a final confrontation with the unspeakable evil that lives on in the town. That's a very brief backstory, but that's from Goodreads. But I just love Salem's Lot. I remember it was one of the first Stephen King books I ever read. I read it when I was like 20 years old, and I didn't want to put the book down. I know a lot of people think it's one of his slower stories, especially the film adaptation from the 70s, but I love it. It is a true reimagining of Dracula. The vampires in it are so scary. One of the most horrifying scenes from Stephen King movies, to me personally, is from the film adaptation of Salem's Lot, and it's also one of the scariest scenes in the novel, if not the scariest scene, and I think it was done very beautifully in the film. So if you want really good vampires set in a small town up in Maine, read Salem's Lot. I can't recommend it enough. So I'm really quickly just going to get into some short story recommendations for you guys, just because I think they are absolutely worth recommending. First and foremost, I want to talk about Nathaniel Hawthorne short stories. I think that he has some of the best autumn feeling, woodsy, deep, dark, spooky short stories out there. I think, unlike Poe, his stories always feel very autumnal, whereas Poe's just kind of feel dark and brooding. His always feel very rooted in the forest. And the one that I want to talk about the most is Young Goodman Brown. Young Goodman Brown, I believe, was the first story I ever read from Nathaniel Hawthorne, like short story. It might have actually been the first thing I ever read from Nathaniel Hawthorne. But if you've ever seen Robert Eggers' The Witch, you're really gonna like Young Goodman Brown. There is a lot of talk about like the devil in the wood and the witch in the wood and the corruption of the puritanical mind. I will leave it at that. But I feel like that's probably his most autumn forward short story. And then we have The Minister's Black Veil, which reminds me more of a lot of the themes and tones in The Scarlet Letter. I don't really want to give you guys summaries of these short stories because they're short stories, so I can't really say too much. But I will say Young Goodman Brown, The Minister's Black Veil, The Birthmark, Rappaccini's Daughter, which definitely not super Halloween-y, but still a really, really good read, and Ethan Brand are all just truly exceptional short stories that I would read from Hawthorne. But Young Goodman Brown is definitely one of the ones that stuck with me the most, and it does really give me Robert Eggers' The Witch vibes. When I think about it, I feel like Eggers probably pulled a lot from Hawthorne's work, especially from that story when he made The Witch. So next up is obviously The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. If for some reason you are not sure what that is the story of the Headless Horseman out in Sleepy Hollow, which is a real place in New York that you can visit, that I will actually be visiting in late September. Very excited about that. It's a tradition I do every year since I live in New York. But just another classic Halloween read. I really love it. It's a little lengthy, but it's still an amazing short story. Gives you all those spooky vibes and adds a lot of depth to like the character of the Headless Horseman that we probably don't always think about in general pop culture, as well as Ichabod Crane, because you gotta talk about Ichabod Crane, right? And then last but not least, this is another story that isn't super Halloween-y, but it is a story that's very scary and that stuck with me a lot, and that I remember reading for the first time during autumn in my 10th grade English lit class, and that is A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. I'm gonna let you guys go in blind to that story, but it does involve a big manor, a mysterious woman, and some crazy, creepy things with a huge twist ending that really stuck with me and scared me. And I think it's probably the scariest thing that I've ever read from William Faulkner. He is very heavily known in the Southern Gothic genre. I don't particularly think that this story is Southern Gothic at all. To me, it just seems like true horror. But I really do love and highly recommend the story. I feel like it's definitely inspired a lot of things that we've seen today in modern horror film as well as in modern horror lit. It definitely banks on some horror tropes that we see quite a lot now. If you are an Avenged Sevenfold fan, A Little Piece of Heaven, it's pretty similar to A Rose for Emily if you know that song. I don't actually know if they're directly inspired by that story, but I do always think of A Rose for Emily when I hear that song. So if you know that story, hopefully that, or if you know that song, hopefully that gives you a little glimpse into what A Rose for Emily has in store for you. Anyway, that is all that I have for you guys today. I have a ton of books that I am trying to read for spooky season. I might do some more in-depth Halloween reads as I get through some newer reads, or if there's some stuff that you're like, how come you didn't put this on your list? Leave that in the comment down below, or leave that in the comments down below, because those might be some of the books that I'm planning on reading for this season. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I post every Monday and Thursday and sometimes Saturdays. If you enjoy these videos, hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah.